1980s, I worked the graveyard shift at a factory in Ohio, cleaning the floors, emptying trash cans, and cleaning up bathrooms. I stayed with a friend and her family, and I used her car to get to work until I was able to buy my own. One night, I realized too late that no one had remembered to put gas in the car. The gas stations were closed, and I was on a wing and a prayer, hoping I had enough fuel to get to work and back home. I made it to work, I worked my shift, and I headed home. But as I turned onto the road to the house, the car started to sputter. I had run out of gas. Well, I got out and I started the 3/4 of a mile walk home in the dark. I could see a little by the moonlight and some light from porches, but that was all. As I walked, I heard something walking in pace with me in the woods to my left. I looked, and all I could see was pitch black dark, so I kept going, thinking it was probably a fox or a raccoon or something like that. But the farther I went, the more nervous I became, and at one point I stopped and stared right into the woods, hoping that I would catch what or who was walking with me. When I stopped walking, so did they, and when I moved forward, they did too. After stopping a couple of times, my imagination began flashing in every possible way, knowing I could be in danger of death on that country back road. When I walked past the family's house to my right, their dog ran to the edge of the ditch line, barking and snarling at me. As if I wasn't already on edge, the thought of that dog about to jump the fence and attack me sent my heart beating into my throat. Well, I picked up my pace. I got past the dog, and a few steps later, I heard the dog yelp. I looked back, but what I saw was nothing. Whatever or whoever had been following me from the woods stopped when I reached the driveway of the place that I was staying. I wanted to take off running for the door, but I held back the urge, knowing that that would only cause a bear or a big cat to chase after me and attack. So instead, I walked as fast as I could, and I got inside. To this day, I don't know what was in those woods pacing me, and I'm grateful to say that I was not harmed. I don't recall ever hearing about Bigfoot back then, so it never entered my mind. I don't care if others believe in it, but personally, I'm a skeptic. To each their own, I say. But with that said, after that night, I made sure the gas tank was full whenever I went to work. I wasn't going to walk home on a dark road in the middle of the night ever again. Oh, dude, I wouldn't either. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm not afraid of the dark woods. I go walking in the woods at night, dark, and turn a flashlight off and just follow a trail that I know. It's really peaceful. But in a strange place, walking down a just totally black road, you can't even make out where you're walking. I've had to do that a couple of times, and it is just a bit unnerving. I don't know why, because there's nothing out there at night that isn't out there during the day. Everything is basically the same. I guess you have nocturnal animals, but at least where I live, there's really nothing out there that'll hurt a human. Although we are getting more bears in our area. I live in North Mississippi, and there have been reports recently, especially over in the Delta, of black bears. Black bears have been in Mississippi for years, and their population is growing. I'm actually kind of glad about that. What a cool animal. Anyway, great story. I appreciate you sending it, sir. Thank you. My dad told me his Bigfoot encounter on his deathbed. He had kept it a secret all his life. He had a tumor on his neck that made him unable to talk, and he told me in a raspy whisper, "Come sit down, son. I need to tell you something important." It was in the mid-'80s in southern Arkansas. My dad was still a young man. He had been working in a swamp doing some surveying. It was just him and his partner out there. The swamp was wide open with cypress trees sticking up everywhere. He was wearing waders, waist deep, and when he looked across the pond, he saw something. It was a big hairy something. It was standing waist deep 150 yards away in the deep water in the middle of the swamp. The water where this thing was standing was about 5 feet deep, which made this guy around 10 feet tall. It was standing still, and it hadn't noticed my dad. It was fishing with its bare hands, successfully letting the fish get close all around its legs like it was just another tree in the water before reaching down and snatching them with his hands. Well, my dad froze. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Not knowing what was going on, my dad's partner called out, "Hey, Johnny, where you at?" It snapped my dad out of shock, and he turned around and waved his arms in the air quickly and motioned for the other guy to shut up and come over. Well, the big hairy guy heard the shouting. He locked eyes with them, and he ripped through the deep water like it was nothing. It was gone almost instantly, and my dad was pissed off at his partner for scaring the monster off. He cussed him out the whole way back to town. My dad kept that story to himself until he was dying and was running out of time to tell it. I always held that story near and dear to my heart because I know for a fact nobody else ever got to hear it, not even my mother. He died when I was still a young boy, but when he told me what he saw, it burned into my memory. Thank you for reading his story. I wanted to honor my father by sharing it with folks who can appreciate it. And then he signs his name. I'm not going to say his name, but yeah, people on this podcast that listen to this podcast will appreciate that story. I don't think I've ever heard, every once in a while I get something new. A lot of these Bigfoot stories, they kind of run together and it's kind of the same thing. I'm not saying that in a negative way, but the behavior apparently is the same and people see the same or they interpret what they see the same. But I've never heard of a Bigfoot fishing with its bare hands in the water. That is interesting. So he stands there and his legs are like tree trunks and fish are drawn to cover like trees and stumps and anything different than open water, and they congregate around his legs and he reaches down and gets one and gets supper. I thought that was pretty cool. But I can imagine that scared your dad, and I can hear him cussing the guy. "Man, why'd you scare that monster off?" I was looking at him. This was a great story. Thank you to the writer for sharing your dad's memory, and I'm glad he told you about it. That's a pretty cool memory for a son. Thank you for sending it to me. Years ago, my big sister had been driving ATVs around the farm with some other friends. This time, I got to sit on the back and go with her. Now, one of our cousins had made a figure-8 course in the dirt for the four-wheelers, and on that day, my older sister and I were the only ones on it. We were coming around a curve when my sister and I simultaneously looked over on the adjacent trail. There was another person on an ATV driving along with us. There was something strange and transparent about this other rider. We were going the same speed, so when we lost him behind the shrubs on the way to where the figure-8 intersects it, we slowed down so as not to crash into him, but it never came around. My older sister, confused, she turned off the four-wheeler and we sat in silence. And the wood had gone silent too, as if it was holding its breath with us. After a few minutes and hearing nothing, my sister turned the four-wheeler back on and drove through the cornfield and parked us in the garage. My twin walked up to greet us and asked what was wrong, but my sister's pale face wasn't what shocked us. It was what she said. "No one needs to be out in those woods today." And with that, she hung up the keys and went into the house. My twin and I were so young that we didn't understand it at the time, and I had forgotten all about it. And then one Thanksgiving, when we were grown up, our older sister got drunk, and she told our whole family what had happened. We had borne witness to the ghost rider. As we grew up, our older sister got into sports, and she made a lot of friends. One of these friends' name was Rachel, and Rachel was awesome. Big sister was often mean during her pubescent years, but her friends were always nice, and they got a huge kick out of my twin sister and me. It was late morning in the middle of our Thanksgiving break, and we went out around one of 3 pump wells on my father's property. The furthest one was out in the woods. We were all on our dad's new four-wheeler, which had a sled attached to the back with a tractor strap, so none of us girls got left out of the fun. We were halfway around the circle that went around the pump jack when, for absolutely no reason, the new four-wheeler shut off. Right as that happened, the sound of laughter from 3 different women started echoing from somewhere deep in the woods. My older sister and her friend Rachel started to panic. My sister turned the key, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The 2 minutes it took to get it restarted felt like 2 hours, but the four-wheeler finally came back to life. She and Rachel sped off as fast as that thing would go, and it wasn't until they were halfway back to Dad's house that they realized my twin sister and I were no longer attached to the back. Somehow the tractor strap had come undone and we were still at the pump jack. I watched the older girls leave, and we yelled at them and tried to make them stop. The whole time, the sound of these terrifying women laughing was creeping closer. I jumped out of the sled and grabbed the rope and started dragging my sister out of the woods. I made it to the end of the trees when my older sister pulled around on the four-wheeler finally. I quickly hooked the tractor strap back and barely managed to jump on when she sped as fast as she could out of there. After that, we all went back inside, silent and completely shaken. We didn't talk about it again until we were older, and to this day, we all remember it the same. Our family had a big shed behind Dad's house with a bathroom and a washer and a dryer for work clothes. All the men in our family were farmers, but they also had a business building oil rigs on properties all over Ohio. If you see a green pump jack in our state, it was probably built by someone in my family. We were outside late one night riding bikes around the vehicles in the shed and sliding around on the ice and the snow. We always had dogs, and our oldest one, Jackson, was the calmest and laziest of them all. Well, that night he was acting strange. He and Duchess, our other dog, were following us around and herding us and keeping us in the light, as far away from the back of the shed as they could. At one point, our older sister saw a strange bear-like creature peering at us from around Dad's car, and at that moment, Jackson and Duchess went bonkers. They were growling and barking. Well, as a young kid, I was terrified. This happened in between seeing the Ghost Rider and hearing the 3 witches, so needless to say, it was a memorable time. Well, my twin ran into the house and she got Dad, who was in the shower, and not a minute later he came out of the house in his robe and his boxers. He was holding a shotgun and he was angry, and we tried telling him what had happened, and he brought us in and he made us go to sleep. Years passed and strange things going on around the house late at night while our father was at work. We would be sitting in the living room and we would hear screams outside, or something would jump on the front porch and it would rock the whole house. At night, I was afraid of going into our kitchen because of the windows. I always got the feeling that something was hiding in the dark looking at us. My twin was always brave, though. One night, she ran out of the house with nothing but a bow and arrow, trying to figure out who was outside looking at us and rocking the house. It wasn't until years later that we figured out what it was. My sisters and I were all sitting on the couch when the house started shaking. We could hear something roaring and stomping outside. Not long before, the owner of the private zoo nearby committed suicide and released all of its animals. We figured the noise was one of his lions. I remember reading about this. This story terrified me. Anyway, sorry to interrupt the story. My twin and I walked outside to check it out, and we immediately felt that something was off. We reached the end of our yard where the gravel began, and something screamed. It wasn't exactly human, but it didn't sound like any animal we'd ever heard before. My sister and I froze, and then the scream finally came to an end, and we walked to the cornfield to get a look over in that area. The corn was at its full height and just a week or so away from being harvested. As we stood there quietly, looking around, something stood up in the middle of the field, and it towered over the corn. I'm not kidding you. My sister, as brave as she was, left me standing right there. By the time I finally got my wits about me, she had already made it through the garage door and into the safety of the house. And at that time, I was still recovering from a broken hip. So I hopped my way to the garage door as fast as I could, and I locked it. And I stared out the window to see if it had followed me. I yelled at my twin for leaving me for dead, but our older sister didn't want to hear anything about it. She had seen this thing before. One time, in the woods behind the pasture, the three of us had been playing in a tipped-over silo. Our older sister was watching a rabbit being chased by a fox when she suddenly paled and ushered us twins into the silo. We sat there in silent fear as she whispered to us what she saw. Something else was chasing the fox and the rabbit, something unnatural, something tall and hairy and terrifying. We stayed there for about an hour in stunned silence before we had the courage to run to the adults. Our older sister told them what she saw, but no one believed her. We didn't know what we had seen until we went to Kentucky to visit my family. Our older sister told our aunt what happened, and she said it sounded like a Bigfoot. I got on her computer, and I found sounds and pictures and stories of other people's encounters with this creature. I found one particular Bigfoot scream that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. My twin was there too, and both of us had tears in our eyes. We had heard that horrible scream before. Now, since then, I've had many run-ins with other cryptids, and I tell everyone who will listen what I've seen. I don't blame you if you don't believe me, but these stories are true. And she signs off, let's see if she says not to say her name. Doesn't say, so she signs off Amanda. Man, that's like a lifetime of weird experiences with ghosts and cryptids and even exotic animals. I remember reading about that story up in Ohio where the owner let all of his lions and tigers and all that kind of stuff, just let it out in the area and then committed suicide. And I think law enforcement had to come in and kill all of these animals. And these were like, these are man-eaters that this person let out. I don't think anyone should be allowed to keep that kind of animal on in their house or on their property. They're just death machines is what they are. That's a whole nother topic that I'm real interested in, but I won't get into it here. But that kind of struck me in this story, along with all her other experiences. I'm surprised there wasn't more in this story about all those animals getting loose, because that is a fascinating story. But anyway, Amanda, thank you for sending the story. It was wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I am a Native American woman, and although my encounter happened almost 20 years ago, it is as clear in my mind as if it happened just yesterday, and I'm sure it always will be. I've lived my life doing things off-grid, and usually as far out in the wilderness as I can go. I've climbed to the summit of the mountains and stayed 12,000 feet in a tent by myself for a month, and I've slept in the snow just for fun. I'm that woman who usually can't find any friends to go camping with me because no one wants to rough it as far out as I go. You would think that I would have had my encounter in one of these remote places on one of my excursions, but I didn't. I came across this being right smack dab in the middle of the day, right off a crowded beach full of swimmers in northeastern Washington. I had gone kayaking with my kids, my sister-in-law and her kids, at a large wilderness lake by the Canadian border. We stopped at a crowded beach at midday so that we could eat our lunch and stretch our legs. And while we were there, my sister-in-law and I both felt extremely uneasy, and we decided not to stay long. She and I joked about a serial killer in the area and tried to make light of our unease, but at the same time we made it a point to tell the kids to go in pairs if anyone had to use the outhouse. She and I also went together, and I remember feeling like I was going to be pounced on at any given moment while I guarded the outhouse door for her. It had taken us hours to get there, and we knew we were pushing our luck to make it back before dusk. So after the kids had eaten and played in the water for a while, she loaded them up in their boats and they all left together. And I lagged behind so I could eat my lunch and sneak a much-needed cigarette. I didn't intend on being there too long, so I just pushed off the shore in my boat and I sat in it while I ate and had a smoke. I noticed that the beach had emptied of the many families who were swimming, and I was now completely alone. I started feeling scared, so I paddled out a few yards from the beach with the thought in my mind that I had more than enough time to get away if something or someone tried to swim out there to get me. Now, it's funny, the stupid stuff that goes through your mind during times like this. I was scared until I noticed off in the distance a tall old man walking down a steep embankment with two small boys ahead of him. He sat on a stump under a rope swing about 100 yards off the beach, and he watched the boys while they tossed stones and played at the water's edge. I decided to sit in my boat offshore about 25 yards to finish my lunch and watch them. But as I sat there, I was beginning to let my imagination get the best of me. I had given my life vest to one of the kids, and since I'm a lousy swimmer, I decided to paddle over to the shore and stay within reach of it while I made my way back around the lake. I kayaked over to the bank and headed into the direction of my family, who were now about a quarter of a mile ahead of me in big water. I had to pass right by this old man along my way. He was sitting with his left leg crossed over his right, and his hands were clasped over his upper knee, and he was staring at me, slowly circling his foot in the air. As I got closer to him, I noticed the two little boys had vanished, but I no longer felt uneasy. In fact, I felt safe knowing he had his eyes on me so intently. I thought that if there was something dangerous in the water and I accidentally rolled my boat, he would at least see it and maybe even rescue me. He never took his eyes off me. I waved to him to be polite, but he didn't wave back. I thought he must not have seen me wave and assumed that he was old because he was wearing a turtleneck sweater and long pants. It was in the middle of August, and it was such a hot day that I figured he must be old, as my father was old and had bad circulation. He always wore clothes that seemed way too warm for the season. I waved at the old man again, but he still didn't wave back. And then I knew he had seen me and was just being rude. So I smiled at him anyway, and since I was only a few yards away and cruising slowly closer, I wanted to be friendly and let him know that I was not a threat. I approached him and saw that he was not an old man at all. He was only in his mid-40s. His hair was salt and pepper, and his beard had some streaks of gray. He was an extremely handsome movie star quality man with perfect features. I was staring at him with my jaw dropped because people that attractive don't show up very often, especially in these parts. He seemed to have a gleam in his eyes that suggested he was enjoying my reaction to him. Now, he wasn't glaring at me, but he was squinting from the sun. And even though his eyes were narrowed, I could still tell he had large, thick lashes. His skin was dark tanned and he looked native, but he had a full, short, trimmed beard, and his shoulders were broad and his chest muscles and biceps were defined. He was absolutely perfect. I passed him just feet away, and I realized he was not wearing a turtleneck. He wasn't wearing any clothes at all. He was completely covered in short, glossy, silver-tipped hair. I realized I was being rude for staring at him, and I looked ahead of my boat, but I couldn't unsee what I had just seen, and my curiosity got the best of me. And when I looked back over my shoulder at him, he stood up. If I wasn't intrigued before, I was now. He must have been at least 8 feet tall. It was unreal. Now, I wasn't afraid. I was just stunned, and my only thought was, what kind of skin disorder must this man have? And why was this insanely tall nudist living clear out here in the middle of the wilderness? I looked ahead of my boat for a moment, and when I glanced back over my shoulder again, the man was gone. He had gone up in the trees. By the time I caught up with my family, my sister-in-law brought to my attention that a hunter had been walking at the top of the mountain on a huge open clearing alongside me. I was in the water, and he was about a half-mile away as the crow flies. He kept up with my boat, and he walked, looking down the mountain toward me every few steps for the rest of the day. He was far away that his body hair looked like clothing again, though I didn't mention that detail to my family. By the time I was loading up the boats in my truck, it was almost dark. We were exhausted. I kept catching myself stopping and looking up into the darkness of the tree line at the edge of the lake every few minutes because I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even though I didn't see him, I knew he was there in the trees, that he was still watching me. So I didn't tell the others what I saw because they would have laughed. I never once thought he was a Sasquatch. I thought that was a myth told by elders to keep kids from straying too far from camp. I honestly thought he was just an attractive man with some kind of skin disorder that caused excessive body hair, and I set out to research that. I was perusing the internet searching for information when I came across an informative website. It was a forum of anomalies, and if you told them your story, maybe they could help you solve your mystery. I posted what I had seen, and I didn't think anything of it until I got a phone call just a short while later. Within an hour, my caller ID read, U.S. Government. I picked up, thinking something bad must have happened to a relative. The person who answered said he wanted to talk to me about the Sasquatch I had written about. I knew then that I didn't want to talk to him, and I panicked and I hung up. Did I really hear him say Sasquatch? I eventually got up the nerve and I told my story, and I received a lot of ridicule, even from my family, so I was hell-bent on finding anyone I could talk to who would believe me. At the time, the BFRO seemed to be the most trustworthy source, so I told them my story, and it wasn't long before I was asked to be interviewed on several Bigfoot radio stations and speak at several conferences. I want to make one thing clear. The man I saw was just that. He was a man. He was not an ape. He was intelligent, and even though he didn't speak to me, I could tell he had a personality and a soul. I will admit with all my heart that when I looked into his eyes, I felt like I was looking at someone who was superior to me in intelligence, kind of like a college professor when you're just starting high school. I don't tell a lot of people the details of this encounter because the ridicule is unrelenting. Had I been terrified by some hideous monster and barely made it out alive, I think people might accept my testimony more than they do with my story. But that's not what happened, though. And since none of us are experts, I fail to see how we can all learn about the diversity in these beings by listening to each other. Instead, we shun the ones that don't fit the narrative. That's why I swallowed my pride and shared with you what I saw. Thank you for reading my story. I realize it's different from most encounters, and I'm going to get flack for it, but it's worth it to me to see if there are others out there who have had similar encounters with beings who were more human than animal. And she signs off sincerely, Two Hawks Laughing. She said at the beginning she was a native woman, and that's her. I'm sure that's her native given name. I don't expect that you're going to catch any flack from anybody that listens to this channel. We've gotten rid of most of the crazy, nasty people that make those comments. Two Hawks Laughing. I think if you, this story may be 2 years old. I don't know. It got sent to me a long time ago, and I hope she's still listening and hears this. But I think if you'll read through the comments, you'll find that the people who watch and comment on this channel are just good people. They're not. You may see one, and if I see one, I just ban them from ever commenting again because it's so useless. I mean, who wastes their time to make a nasty it just makes it will never make sense to me. It will never make sense to me. But if I see one, I'll ban them from commenting. But I guarantee you 999 out of 1,000 will be supportive, will be understanding, and you may connect with someone who's had a similar experience. So I'm so glad you sent this in. This was a great story, and you wrote it really succinctly and well and to the point, and it was a perfect story to read on this podcast. And I hope you get some interaction with people who you can connect with that may have seen something similar. I really hope that happens. So thank you to Two Hawks Laughing for sending this story. Okay, I've got time to do another little short UFO experience, and then we'll wind this up. My husband and I had a UFO sighting when we were visiting the southern part of New Jersey. We were in the area for my father-in-law's funeral, and we were staying with our close friends. After a day on the Jersey shore, a group of us enjoyed our night together around the fire pit. But as we were getting ready to wrap up the night, we saw flashes in the sky and surrounding trees. Well, we started to investigate, and we headed to the front of the property, assuming it was lightning or fireworks, even though there were hardly any clouds in the sky. We settled around the fire pit in the backyard again, and we looked at the sky, and that's when we saw a UFO-shaped object highlighted in a cloud from the light of the moon. And it moved and descended at incredible speeds. And just as we were wrapping our heads around what we were looking at, it vanished. It was as amazing as it was unsettling. Thank you for your channel and for sharing all the stories you do. That was a little short story, but no less amazing to the person who sent this. As much as a Bigfoot, I would love to see something like that. They didn't actually see lights. They actually saw the craft, and then boom, it was gone. To me, that's fascinating stuff. Anyway, I wanted to squeeze one more in. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you. We'll have more to come this week, and we'll see you when we get another one done, and that'll be soon. Thank you all.